Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, June 25th. It is 9:37 in the morning. I want to apologize to the community and those watching for starting late today. Chair Pratt and I were in another session with the business community on the Sunshine Coast. They're looking at what the next 90 days look like. And we look forward to getting the information from them as to how we as local government can support them in moving forward. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're within the traditional territories of the Shishalt and Squamish Nation. So we have an amended agenda this morning. Does everyone have the amended agenda? Yes, all right. So I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. So we'll move into the first item. And I have to get into my correct agenda here. So the first item is first let's do a motion to receive all the reports and the communications. Moved and seconded, all in favor. Thank you. So Annex A, this is 2019 Sunshine Coast Regional District Corporate Annual Report. And Tina, did you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the 2019 annual report for the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And for this year, this particular version of the report is trying to align with the board's new strategic plan that was adopted at the end of 2019 or 2018. So this also forms part of the CAN4 award, so the Government Finance Officers Award. And so that'll be submitted again for this year.
All right, do directors have any questions or comments? Sorry, and I have to show my participants so I can see hands. No questions or comments. Oh, Director McMahon, over to you.
Okay, that is a really interesting report. It's got a lot of good information on it about the SCRD, which is nice to have. I've taken a copy out and put it in a conspicuous place on my desktop so I can reference it. I only had two little teeny nitpicks. One is on page 101. The income for the different areas is by individual rather than household, I think. And since we tax people by household, I think that maybe that would be a more useful statistic. And on page 105, the transit ridership graph doesn't have zero as its basis. And that's just a little nitpick of mine because I like graphs that start at zero. It's mine. But, you know, other than that, I enjoyed reading the report. I learned a few things.
All right. Any other comments or questions from directors? All right. Thank you to staff for putting this together. I know it is not a legislative requirement for the regional district, well, where it is for municipalities. So actually taking the time to pull this together, I know it's a lot of work. It does though provide a summary and an opportunity to look back over the previous year and see how the regional district as a whole is looking to fulfill on the strategic plan of the board. So we thank you for the effort and the time that you put into this document. So there is a recommendation that the 2019 annual report be approved for distribution. Would someone like to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item. This is the financial reporting requirement statement of financial information year ended December 31st, 2019, Annex B, pages 2 through 66. And we received the report. Are there any questions? Tina, did you want to speak to this first before we go for questions?
Just very briefly, Chair, this is one of our statutory requirements, and just the only note of change is that this was one of the points that the ministry made for local governments as part of their financial measures to change the due date to August 31st to submit our statement of financial information. However, staff were already well underway to completing it, so we are striving to meet the June 30th deadlines.
So any questions from directors? All right. Keep it up. This is going to go fast. So the two recommendations on page, what page is this on? Page 2. That the statement of financial information for the year ended December 31st, 2019 be approved as presented. And further, that this recommendation be forwarded to the June 25th, 2020 regular board meeting. Would someone like to make those recommendations? Director Toth and Donna McMahon, the second. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Next item, Annex C. This one I have a feeling will take a little more time to get through. Over to you, Tina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this particular report is to combine both a budget debrief of the 2020 process, so having a review and feedback from the committee and board as to what worked well, what didn't work well, what do we want to continue on for the upcoming process. And also talk a little bit about kicking off our 2021-2025 financial planning process. So included in the report, there's a few different segments, and if Chair, you wanted to kind of walk through each segment and pause for discussion for each of those items. And essentially the first part of the report really just talks about the budget process last year, and then gets into how we want to proceed in the upcoming year.
All right, so I'm going to have you go to page 69. I've highlighted certain segments as we're going through here. If I miss any, I know Tina will call me on them. Second paragraph talks about enhanced engagement and communication plan for the board's consideration. So I know that we don't have a communications manager, and we're looking at hiring that position later in the year. But in the meantime, staff are looking at putting together a plan around communication, and they'd like input from us with ideas, number of sessions, how we should engage with member municipalities, etc. So if you have any information you'd like to give to staff at this point, please offer. Director McMahon.
I just like to ask if there's any way we can expedite hiring our communications manager, because this has been a really big hole, and it's only gotten bigger with the novel situation we find ourselves in. And trying to invent a whole new communication strategy for the SCRD from the ground up for senior staff who are already busy doing their own jobs seems like an awful lot to undertake.
All right. I don't know who wants to take that one. Would that be our CAO or our CFO?
I can speak to it briefly. Looking at the reworked work plan, saw us trying to have that position for the fourth quarter. We had talked about potentially getting the ad out toward the end of June, recognizing that the process takes a bit of time. So we'll probably be posting for that position fairly soon. And then we'll just keep our fingers crossed that we get good candidates and we're successful working through the process. But I would imagine that even if we can get the posting out at, say, the end of June or early July, it's going to take a bit of time to get through the process and have someone actually start.
Hey, Director McMahon, you took your hand down and put it back up again, so I'm assuming you have something to follow up or something else?
Sure. All the regional districts in the province, I assume, and local governments are dealing with this question of how to engage the public. The problem of engaging the public on the budget has always been a thorny issue, and this is just putting a whole new wrinkle in it, and I'm wondering if there's any innovative ideas from other jurisdictions that we could steal.
All right, Director Hilt.
Thanks, Chair. The feedback that I'm getting from the past year in terms of don't necessarily have a comment on how to do it, but the desired outcome would be that a homeowner has a better sense of what their costs are going to be in the year coming up. Is what the feedback that I got is that people were caught by surprise at these escalating costs, and their budget, their household budget, needs to be managed so that they can anticipate these costs coming in. So that would be the result, is that people have an estimate that is their household expenses through taxation and user fees going to go up, and how much? And those are difficult questions to answer. We don't actually know until everything's in the bag. But that's one of the desired outcomes, is that people have a sense of how much more it will cost them in the year coming up, so that they can set money aside. That's the comment in terms of result.
Thank you. Anybody else? Director McMahon.
I think staff is already aware of this, but I would like again to encourage us to tell people how they can sign up for monthly payments for their taxes and for their utility bills, because the people who get hit hardest are the ones who are paying annually. And it's a big amount for a bill that comes up in June or July.
Sorry, Director Kroll.
I'm sort of following up on Director Hilt's comment. I think, it is important. People like to know, how things are progressing and how it's going to hit them. But I don't, we've 2 years of budgets with the town of Gibsons, and every budget meeting we had, that went on endlessly, the gallery was empty. And, I don't know what you do to encourage engagement. It's a huge challenge. I know our communications officer was trying to keep people abreast on our website of what was happening, that the budget meetings were going on. But again, it was endless meetings and empty gallery. And then the tax bills go out, and of course, then it's like an orchestra of scorched cats. So it's, do you issue special budget discounts if you attend meetings and give us feedback? It's, it's a huge challenge. But I agree with Director McMahon that it did help us. The fact we had a communications officer who, as the meetings were progressing, was advising the community.
Director Hilt. Oh, Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, after being with the regional district for many years, the part about engaging community in relation to the budget is difficult when you position it as such. People don't really have a connection to the word budget, but they most certainly have connections to things that matter to them, such as water, transit, community recreation. And so that's how we've positioned some of the communication or engagement strategies in the past. So whether or not there are community dialogues or the individual type of engagement that we do. And I think that's what the senior management team, or essentially what we're focusing on, is how do we integrate those engagement things that are already going on to then integrate on, what are those things going to cost you in the end? And what are you willing to pay for them? So maybe it's just how we reposition or strategize some of those conversations within those existing engagements. And again, as part of the budget, I think the benefit of us having this discussion early is to try to have some goals and what are people able to pay coming forward? What is people's affordability to pay for certain things? Because You know, I know even with my own children, they want a lot of things, but you know, when you ask them to pay for it, they can't. So I think that's just the nature of society nowadays. So I think that's all what we are trying to work towards when we talk about a communication strategy is and also looking at other local governments, not just regional districts, but there are some pretty good examples out there that we have found. And that's what the senior management is currently working on, is review some of those, see what might work for us and what we can do within our capacity, and knowing that we might have that new resource later in the year. So maybe that helps.
Right, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, CFO. The piece that I like is using existing avenues that are already there, and what as I'm going to I'm still a newly elected until I get through 50% of the term. I'm still newly elected. Is that it's an annual cycle for a 5-year outlook. And most householders don't look, their 5-year outlook is, am I going to hold on to my property in 5 years, or am I going to sell and move? These are the kinds of questions that people are asking me. I need to know how much my whole household expense. And in terms of engagement, an 18% tax increase is a very, you can get a lot of engagement by throwing that out at the end. I would prefer not to repeat that kind of engagement, the unintended engagement that came after the large number came out. So the surprise, and so I think that continuous engagement, that everything essentially comes down to the budget at some point. And so it's not just these chunks as they come before the board, but for the public, it's how do you keep the public involved in how their money is spent over the whole year and that 5-year period. So I like that idea of, embedding the budget consultation engagement with these other consultations, whatever that is, whether that's water or solid waste or parks and rec. So I support that idea of finding ways to fit the budget into the existing engagements that we already have.
Okay, I'm going to put forward an idea that did not come from me. That came from one of our councillors, Matt McLean. When our annual report came forward to the District of Sechelt, he suggested that we as a council, and I'm looking to put this forward to the board here, that we take our annual report and our strategic plan and sit down and have a workshop soon, sometime before staff really get involved in the budget, to look at where are we, what have we accomplished in our strategic plan, and provide some guidance to staff for moving forward, so that we can look at, are there things that, yes, we still want to do these are not a priority, right? We can do the fine tuning and give direction to staff in going forward and working with the budget planning and budget process, because it's their work plans and the budget that we actually in the end adopt that will see us achieving what we're looking at achieving in our strategic plan. So I think that we're almost halfway through at this point. I think it's a good opportunity to take that and work with senior staff and revise it. We're going to all have some pre-work to do, but I think we can put some process together to make that happen. Director McMahon.
I support that idea. I think it's time to look at our strategic plan. A lot of things have changed since we put that strategic plan together, not least of which is a global pandemic and a new CAO. So it's time to sit down and reconsider how much we can get done realistically. I have a huge list of things that I would like us to do, but realistically, what can we get done in the next 2 and a bit years? We need to talk and think about that.
Okay, I've got Director Kroll, Director Pratt, and Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair. Something that we found really useful, and I have mentioned it before, was when we came back to do our budget, the Gantt chart was really useful because, at a glance, you could virtually see what projects were started, how far we were into them, and it gave you sort of a bit of a guide to, direct the conversations.
Thank you. Director Pratt?
Thank you. I note on the bottom of page 69 is staff have put the board strategic plan review in for looking at sometime between July and October. And I definitely support that. And I'm just wondering if we bringing the annual report, I like that idea as well. And other, looking at where we've been in the past year and taking that doing it as a real deep dive on both. We've certainly had a lot of changes in the last few months that will change our focus going forward.
All right, I've got Director Hiltz, Lee, and McMahon.
In terms of the engagement, in our digital virtual world now, I think there seems to be a bit more acceptance of smaller kind of webinar kind of chunks, rather than everyone fill up a room. The virtual and ease seems to be so smaller chunks of time commitment for people, I think, is something as an opportunity through the virtual setting. And with respect to the virtual setting is less text and more images. It's hard for people to digest these complicated numbers with a 2 pages of text or a 40-page financial summary. So the imaging seems to be a key component to helping people understand in less than 5 minutes of their valuable time of how to understand the budget and the annual cycles and so on.
Thank you. Director Lee and then Director McMahon.
I'd like to echo that. I think we need to be able to link all of our projects back to the strategic plan. And that's something important to do ongoing, as well as it is to start the new process, because the new process needs to say, yeah, we've got these projects and they're meeting this strategic goal and we're this far along and we better expect to spend this much more. So I really like that idea of getting that done as soon as we can. So we get a head start, because that's got to be step one in. It's got to be step 2, 3, and 4 in the existing budget, and it's got to be step 1 in our new budget, because that's going to actually set the tone for the bulk of our spending in the following year. Because you don't get strategic goals achieved in a single year. So, yep, we need to get that done. The other thing, though, is like those service plan lights were extremely valuable to me. And so we should probably be starting to work on them for the coming year as well. So somewhere in the project. So that's my thoughts on this discussion so far.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
2 things regarding engagement. I was just thinking about TurboTax. I do my taxes online every year. And there's, in the upper left of the screen, there is always a total. What's the bottom line? What do I owe at this point in the tax process? And that's one of the things, is that we have these discussions about different services independently. And people will say, oh yeah, I'll pay $20 more for that. But then all of a sudden, all those $20 add up and they're like, oh my, how did we get to that total? So if there's a way to keep an eye on the cumulative effects of our decision making, then that would be helpful. Regarding the timeline as laid out by staff, I think is where we probably need to go. But for the strategic plan review, I would urge that we do it sooner rather than later. Everything else is going to proceed from that. And we also have to be prepared to be nimble, because we don't know what on earth is going to unfold this year. So I would feel better preparing now and having some contingencies in place if things start going off the rails again.
And Director Lee.
I realize I didn't quite finish my thought process, and that is that once we understand ourselves exactly what we're doing and how everything we do relates back to our strategic plan, we ourselves can communicate out and get everybody thinking, relating work to real outcomes, which is, I think, how you get people interested in the budget. You people always say there's 200 of you, but what the hell are you doing? And we have to be prepared to say everybody's fully employed and we have more to do than we have people. And so we know what you want, and this is what we're doing each year to get there. And that's the kind of thing that will get people interested in budget. They're not interested in, they're interested in results and how we're getting there. And so we have to be able to articulate it that way.
All right. See no more comments on that one. Next topic is timelines. And you'll notice in the timelines that while we had indicated to staff that we would like to move towards an adoption of budget by end of December, given the uncertainty that we're dealing with now, we won't know until the end of December what next year's requirements are going to be for funding. So the timeline has not shifted to move closer to the end of December adoption, and I think the board is in alignment with that given the times we're in. If not, please say something now. Nobody's putting up their hands. All right. Next one, service plans. So Director Lee was actually bringing this up already. The service plans on page 70, staff are wondering if we would like to continue with the service plan development and the service plan light that they provided to us for the first time this past year. Director Lee indicated he's in favor. Anybody else like to comment? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I would say I'm in favor again, and combining that with the Gantt chart and the visuals to kind of show the path that we're going. I'm supportive of those. Yeah, and it's the first time round, so these are kind of new tools from last year. So I think it's going to take a little bit to kind of work around the edges and find where we want to make these tools work for us. So yeah, I think it's particularly if it's already something that's existing that staff are working on and they can just kind of tailor to the public. So again, using those things that we already have and staff are already producing, and to kind of repackage it up for kind of the more public consumption.
All right, Director Ties.
Yeah, I'm also in favor. I was looking for the thumbs up button, but apparently when the webinar function on Zoom, you don't have the thumbs up button anymore. So I like all the conversation that's been happening so far.
All right, thank you. Next one, under rating criteria and mandatory projects. So the first year, we did not have mandatory projects showing in the budget, like in the deliberation piece. And then in the last year, we actually requested that those proposals come to us rather than being included in the round one figures. And staff are looking for feedback on that. So Director Ties, Director McMahon, Director Toth.
Sorry, I forgot to take it down.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Okay, mostly I like it. I just wanted to review, like, I know what imminent asset failure is. Regulatory compliance is straightforward and safety is straightforward, but I'm a little fuzzy on exactly what business continuity is.
All right, who'd like to speak to that?
I can.
Okay.
Business continuity are things like our hydro is going up. And in order for us to, we're not changing anything. That's just something that is going up for us. We also might have other costs that have increased due to various things like fuel or whatnot. So we have to increase the costs within our base budget to maintain the same service level. So that's for a sort of a service level decision. So we ask the board to make that decision. So yeah, it's typically base budget increases is what you would find.
All right, Director Toth, Lee, Hiltz, and back to McMahon.
I like seeing the mandatory stuff, the safety, things like that. It helps to sort of know where the numbers are coming from when you look at the increase, as opposed to trying to dig back into things. Just going through budget, I felt like it went fairly smoothly. I mean, it would have to be something pretty weird for us to decline including it, but it's still nice to see those and be able to build those numbers in, just so we've got a better grasp of things.
Thank you. Director Lee?
I think Director Toth covered most of what I was going to say, and that I like to see them so I understand the big picture. There might be, in a very exceptional circumstance, that we might want to change something of that. But I think it's our job to understand the budget in its entirety, and that allows us to do that. So I'm all for seeing and approving.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I would go into the supportive camp on this one. I think it leads to the transparency and to the public that it's to explain the kind of regulatory changes that have keep coming down and add to the, I'm going to say, burden of the regulatory experience on the public. I'm going to make a comment on Director McMahon's, the imminent asset failure. I don't think it is necessarily as clear. The Langdale wastewater treatment facility has been an imminent asset failure for 8 years. So I'm not sure how clearly, the wheels falling off the car, pretty imminent, but the wheels getting slightly flat and got a kind of, the getting bald on the left side and need rotating. I'm not necessarily sure how clear that is. It sounds very immediate, but when we have imminent asset failures that aren't dealt with immediately, it sort of loses that meaningful impact for me. So I'm not sure if imminent asset failure or whether there's a kind of a ranking of asset failure, like all the wheels are off, we got a spare in the trunk, some kind of ranking of what imminent means. So I'm struggling with that word whenever I see it.
Good point. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I'm just going to say the decision about business continuity assumes that we are maintaining the same level of service. And that's where my problem with this process is that we do not go back and start by reviewing the level of service that we are delivering. In some cases, it's very straightforward. Transit would be a pretty good example. If you're going to do a Saturday bus schedule, it takes so many assets. Ta-da. But other things are very are up to deliberation, and we don't normally go back and look at the base budget for the SCRD. It's just assumed that everything that we are currently doing, we are going to continue to do at that level. And this year particularly, it seems to me that we need to go back and review what level of service. I'm going to get into that in our sustainability policy, which I think is probably the place that we will do that. But I just wanted to flag that as a concern that I have.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
I'm going to follow up on that theme of the service level, and kind of my reading is that that financial sustainability policy that the SCRD has essentially says maintain status quo service levels. I think it's kind of embedded in there. So maybe there's something about the financial sustainability policy as it reflects to the budget process. I haven't tried to put those things together, but now that you mentioned, there is a direct connection, which I don't necessarily see the language of the policy making it into the budget process, such as inflationary factors for hydro and things like this. So whether we're actually following the financial sustainability policy in the budget process for evaluating service levels, rises, existing ones, decreases. Yeah. I don't know what to do about that connection, but there is a strong connection. Maybe staff has some wisdom to express about the relation of these documents.
And we could probably talk further about that when we get to the sustainability policy. Okay. Next item in here is with regards to the website. So as we know, the website is being redesigned. And it does note in here that there has been difficulty in finding documents, but through the website redesign project for 2020, they anticipate that it will be in time for the 2021-2025 financial planning process. Yeah, good move. All right, so we are up to the financial sustainability policy. So first, an amendment to the section here. The last sentence says staff are recommending the policy come forward for review in the fall of, it should say 2020, not 2021. Okay, so this fall. All right, Director McMahon.
Good. That saves me one comment. So on page 83, the policy explicitly says each budget cycle, the board will consider the cost of existing services at existing service levels before considering enhancements. What it doesn't say is we will review the existing service levels to decide whether that is the right service. So what we're doing every year is we're looking at our existing service plus additions, but we never look at subtractions. And that's where I have an issue with the policy, because we've got to put subtractions on the table as well as additions.
Right, Director Pratt.
The CFO did have her hand up if you wanted to go to her first.
Right, okay. Tina?
Well, I think this is very interesting. I'm not sure if bringing this forward now, which is essentially the budget proposal template has had many iterations over the years. And it actually did used to have a lot of the sections that are being identified again, such as, you know, is this an increase to service level or a decrease to service level? And what have people demonstrated? What have budget managers demonstrated that they've considered some of those reductions in service level? So I think this is where I think we're hearing that just a holistic review of service levels in tandem with the strategic plan prior to the budget and how that links to the financial sustainability policy. And then that would then subsequently lead to what these templates and service plans look like going forward. So I'm just hearing that there's a lot of preliminary discussion that probably needs to occur. So
I think what Director McMahon is pointing to as well is, you know, as we know, I mean, if you keep track of the newcomers to the coast, our population has a lot of new people who come here. They don't necessarily recognize the service that's being provided and what they're paying for, and haven't necessarily made that connection. So I think what she's indicating is that some of these conversations may be community conversations around things like recreation levels and what we're providing, right? So some of the identifying which are essential services, right? Wastewater, water, I mean, those are essential services. So what about the others that aren't, that people are paying for? Do they want to continue because the regional district model is based on providing services that the community wants, that they're willing to pay for. And I think what we're feeling is in some cases, we're not sure if the community has made that connection and realized that they actually have a say in what we're providing, and then how we make that connection back to budget. So it's a bigger conversation, and it'll have to be picked apart at some point somehow. Director Pratt, Ties, McMahon, and Hiltz.
Thank you. I think between the CFO and yourself, Chair Seegers, that pretty much summed up what I was going to add on to Director McMahon's comments about it does need to have a further conversation on what we do want to provide and where we do need to look at the connection piece. So thanks.
Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that keeps on kind of revolving in my head in this regard is what the infrastructure deficit is that's been 50, 60 years in the making, and how asset management fits into all of this, and how much the increases are going to, in that regard, are going to further impact affordability of the service levels we're running at right now. So, I mean, this is a huge issue, and I see a lot of costs coming down the line to make up for this infrastructure deficit, and I don't, especially after this pandemic, I don't see a lot of support from senior levels of government with austerity and whatever else may be in store for us. So so these are some big questions I think that need to be answered, and I don't know if there's any way to project as to how much our taxes are going to increase due to infrastructure deficits. And that's very difficult because there are potential grants and whatever, but overall, I do think we need to have a big picture view on this whole thing, and everything that's been said so far, plus potential impacts of asset management, somehow need to be incorporated and taken to the public, so that they can actually wrap their heads around it as well.
Okay, Director McMahon and then Director Hiltz.
That was a good point. I'm just going to, two minor things. In 4.8 under efficiencies, it doesn't specifically mention collaboration with other local governments on the coast. It does say partnerships, and that's great, but I think as part of our strategic objectives, perhaps we should specifically say collaborations with other governments to realize efficiencies and cost savings. And under 4.9 service reviews, it says that we do service reviews, but it says the regional district will undertake regular reviews of its services. Do we do that?
Tina?
Yes, and the most two recent that you'll recall would be the fire departments and the Sunshine Coast emergency planning, where we did a pretty significant deep dive.
Thank you. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to just tie the policy back to the engagement aspect, and I'm going to speak from personal experience. I would consider myself fairly understanding of local government, but the whole concept of what a service is, what a service level is, it's a remarkable concept. I'm really blown away how well it can express what we're trying to deal with. So I think the public, and I'm going to put myself in the public camp, understanding that's what a service is, what a service level is, and the affordability. I remember, I think CFO says something like the services you want at a level that you want at a financially sustainable level. These kind of nice, short, key concepts, which I'm going to tie to the COVID. This is like stay safe, stay coastal. So these smaller chunks of how to understand these complicated concepts and somehow explaining service level. I think of it as, you know, my service level is I shovel the driveway when it snows. I used to shovel the whole thing. Now I just shovel the end and the beginning to get the cars out because I don't have the time. My bread baking is way down. I don't. My service level in my household has dropped significantly since taking on this job. So I think there's a lot of ways to communicate what a service level is, and rather than the bureaucratic aspect of service level and silos, and I think there's some ways to tie it to the household level that people can really get an understanding, and they're managing service level in their own households. They're managing it through the COVID and how, and it comes back to this communication of complicated concepts in very simple statements. And so I am tying the engagement with this policy piece, that there are just these fun, it's like gravity. Yeah, the apple falls to the ground. Service level, the money falls to the ground. Something nice and simple, memorable, and we all agree on it. So I'm just tying those two pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Tina?
And I think we can all acknowledge that I think a regional district budget is has an added complexity to it because we have so many combinations of services depending on your geographical location. And so that's why we can't do a one size fits all from an engagement strategy, because it really, especially when you integrate all the things that have been discussed, such as what are the implications to asset management and the full cycle costs, it really depends on who you're speaking to, because it'll be different from an islander as it would be for someone up in area A on a small wastewater system like Merrill or Canoe. So it really depends on who you're speaking to. And I think that's what we're working to consider is the higher level concepts right down to the community-based concepts. So I think that's the challenge. That's our challenge.
All right, Director McMahon and then Director Hiltz.
No question it's a big challenge. I'm still trying to communicate it to me, never mind anyone else. One of the aspects of this is prioritizing services. This got talked about a bit. And during COVID, we had designated essential services. I think we could agree that there is a different priority level between the fire department and the swimming pool. There are things that are essential and there are things that are nice to have. And so somehow we do need to have that discussion about the different services. There's a number of different ways to cut it. You know, another way to look at it is the fire department covers 100% of the people in the service area, whereas, you know, the swimming pool may only be used by 10% of the people in this service area. I don't know. That's a whole other discussion. There's also a discussion about setting targets for fees. Like how much of the cost of the service should the fees cover? Should it be 100%? Should it be 50%? Hopefully we're going to have that conversation too, because I think it's a good idea to have a target. It not necessarily a really hard target. It could be put as cover at least 50%, something like that. But to have an expectation on fees is a really good idea for all of them, not just, I think some of them do have that expectation, but others don't.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
I think I'm getting to my last comments here. Director Ties mentioned that the infrastructure deficit, and it was, I think, one of the asset management presentations, the concept of intergenerational equity. I've been talking to people about this, and it's starting to really twig onto people about such as the landfill. The people who put in their drywall 25 years ago didn't necessarily aren't going to be paying for the remediation of that void that has formed from the deposition of their drywall. So whether this, and I think it ties to the cost recovery in some ways as well, that do these things need to be in, I think they're embedded in the financial sustainability policy, like intergenerational equity and cost recovery and service level, but it doesn't quite seem to be pulled out for the prominence that it needs to be. So yeah, I agree with so much what we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take Director Hiltz's comment. I'll come back to you, Director McMahon, but on page 71, in the second paragraph, one of the pieces that staff would like to look at inside our sustainability policy is a policy statement related to user fees paying for operations and parcel tax or frontage fees paying for future capital and debt items. So that's something that hasn't been put in the policy previously, and we've been moving towards that, but that's one of the big pieces that impacted our wastewater charges this year. And they're looking to actually put that into the policy so that it's clear and upfront for everybody, and we could do some information about that. Director McMahon.
Okay, you can tell I made a lot of notes. For all the major projects that we are looking at, we need to find a way to measure the climate impact of our decisions. For instance, we are faced at the landfill with 3 different options, all of which cost around $1 million. But we don't know whether they are similar in terms of their GHG emission impacts, either for the actual project or any effect they might have on our landfill in the long term. And that's a portion of our budget that's missing. This is, we're not alone. Everybody is now struggling with this. And I'm on the climate caucus's carbon accounting task group. But that's really important. I mean, if we put in a few EV charging stations or something, that's nice. But when we are looking at a major project, we need to look at what impact is it going to have on our portion of this climate.
I don't see any further hands up at this point. Tina.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, Chair. There is a line in the budget template, in the project budget proposal template that does, but I think what I'm hearing is something a little more explicit on the GHG implications. So staff can look at what that might potentially look like. And, instead of just saying that it doesn't reduce GHGs, either a yes, no question, I think there's a little bit more that's desired there, is what I'm hearing.
Director Khan?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's the case. I realize that everybody is struggling to find accurate measurements right now, so we may not be able to come up with, a definitive answer, but whether it's going to be a big impact, a small impact, negligible impact, those kind of things are helpful for us when we're looking at decision making. I'm going to make one final comment, and that is, have we ever looked at de-acquiring any of our assets? We have a sort of a motley assortment of assets that we have come into possession of over the years for various and assorted reasons. But have we ever looked at perhaps giving them back? I realize people don't want their sewage back, but just thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
Yes, we have done that for ports. We have looked at that for some of the parks community halls, maybe not in a holistic manner. And in the most recent past, we have a recommendation, and there's a report that is scheduled to come forward to infrastructure services regarding wastewater facilities. So it has, but again, in an ad hoc way, more in a service level based versus in a holistic way to look at everything.
All right, Director Lee.
Donna just touched on one of my favorite subjects, and that is how do we ensure that we're operating most effectively, and what can we give back, and how can we streamline what we've got to make it more cost effective. I've brought it up before, of course, like the community halls. I think they should be community halls, and they should be run by the community with as little support from the tax base overall as possible. Community halls to me are something that the community should build and should operate, and it's theirs, which is very different from a school, which is a basic need. And the same thing in the wastewater. The regional districts generally are on course to become a municipality sometime in the future. And when they are, then they plan as a municipality, such as Seashelt grabbing the bull by the horns and making a community-wide wastewater system. It could have been simply merging and operating multiple systems to make it a community-wide. But somehow as a regional district, we need to have those plans in place to not only reduce cost overall, but also to position ourselves as a larger community, probably evolving to a municipality at some point. So it's costly and it requires planning, but in the long term, you get your money back, I think anyways. So how do we do something like that? How do we say we want it? How do we know the community wants it? How do we put it in a budget and get going on it? That's a discussion that we need to have.
And I'm going to say that probably is a conversation for the regional growth strategy process, because that brings everybody to the table and we look at where are we as a community looking at targeting growth and what are the impacts of that and the implications for infrastructure support. Okay. Director McMahon.
Back to community halls just for a minute. I do think that we need to have a discussion about community halls. We have kind of gotten into the business of running community halls ad hoc. And I think we need to have the discussion of where the SCRD stands on running community halls. Do we want to acquire more? Do we want to build them? Because there is a very large project out there for a community hall, which will have an ongoing impact on the budget. And I think some of the community halls that we have right now probably are very inexpensive to operate, but I don't really know. So I would welcome that discussion at some point. I'm not sure where the place to put that is.
All right. I think so. Some of this, this is fascinating. I'm enjoying the conversation and we're going to move forward, but I think staff have captured most of these. I think some of them are going to show up inside of our annual plan, strategic planning piece, because some of these will actually drive those conversations. So I look forward to you bringing those conversations. I'm going to take you back to page 67. There are two recommendations there that staff would like us to indicate the direction to them. So the first one is that the draft process and timelines for the 2021-2025 financial planning process be approved as presented. And further, that the board calendar be amended to include special corporate and administrative services committees November 5th and 6th, 2020, for the purposes of 2021 pre-budget meetings. Someone like to make those recommendations? Moved and seconded. Any comments? Director McMahon.
Yes, with the proviso that we are going to review the policy in the fall of 2020, I'm on board with this.
Yes. All right. Tina?
Yeah, Dean's missing here, so I'm not sure where he went. I think that would be a good motion to make that was explicit and it was documented. I didn't include it in part of the recommendation just because I wasn't sure if the board was in alignment with that. And even to that, I heard a lot about, service reviews or focusing on core services. So I don't know how the committee feels about being explicit on that, or whether that's part of your strategic plan review.
Board, how would you like to address that piece? The final one. We can add in the policy, right? The review of the policy for fall of 2020. That's the piece you'd like to see in there. And then what about the other piece that Tina was referring to? Do we want to wait until after we have the workshop on the annual plan and the strategic plan, and then see what direction we want to move forward? I'm seeing nodding heads. Okay, so would someone like to make an amendment to the recommendation that's on the floor to include that staff bring back a policy with regard, revise the strategic plan policy, or sorry, sustainability policy, incorporating the user fees paying for operations and parcel tax, frontage fees paying for future capital debt items, and potentially other items put forward by the board. Someone like to make the amendment? Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. All right, so everybody clear on the amendment? Director Hills.
I'm not sure where the motion began and your statement ended, so maybe it could be read back.
Sure, Tara. See what you can do with that one. She's shaking her head.
Thank you, Chair. As what I got was the financial sustainability policy be brought forward for review in the fall of 2020, including user fees, and there was a list of other things that went by fairly quickly.
Director McMahon?
I'm not sure that we need to include the full list in the motion.
No. Yeah, the motion could just be that staff bring back the financial sustainability plan in the fall of 2020. I think they've got the list. They know what needs to be addressed. All right. So that's the amendment that's on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Director Pratt.
Just going to look to staff if they do want that that explicitness within the motion, or if they're okay with that first, before we move before we carry that.
No, I for myself, I mean, I'll look to the corporate officer, but I think that we've captured a lot of discussion notes here, and so to capture that in a motion, I think would be a challenge, and we may not want to limit ourselves to that either. So just the way it is, I think is sufficient from my perspective.
All right, so all those in favor of the amendment? All right, so then we have an amended motion on the floor. So the first two as written in our report, plus the one about the sustainability policy. Okay, all those in favor of the amended motion? Thank you very much. Thank you for that conversation. And I'm going to look to the board. It is 20 to 11. Do you want to take a 5-minute break now before we get into other items, or do you want to continue to move forward? Okay, thumbs up for what? 5 minutes, all right. Let's take a 5-minute break. It is, I have 10:41, so we'll say 10:46. See you then. 6D, Union of BC Municipalities Resolutions, Cumulative Effects of Land Use Decisions. Sherry.
Thank you, Chair. This proposed resolution has been brought forward at the request of the board at their June 11th meeting. The resolution must be adopted today in its final perfected form in order to meet UBCM's submission deadline.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm not 100% happy with where the resolution is at right now. Both I and Director Hiltz have had some email back and forth about it. And I think rather than trying to perfect it on the fly today, that we might let it slide past the deadline. I know it's a shame to miss it, but we've got a lot on our plates right now, and we can still bring the issue forward to Flinroe and Modi and others, even if we miss the deadline.
Okay, does anybody else want to weigh in on this one? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was had contacted staff about some proposed amendments, and I kind of dropped the idea just to get it through to the deadline. And one of my overall comments was UBCM resolutions are often supposed to be more of a regional issue, and so we're looking at Sunshine Coast, and so I wasn't sure how it would fit in at a UBCM level. But if it's such a topical, timely, and a great topic, and in my background reading, there's municipalities and regional districts around the province working around this topic, but not kind of nailing it. And so if postponing is an option, I'm not sure how it fits in with staff timelines and things like this. And I'd be interested in hearing more about the delaying it and going for a late submission if that's possible.
Let's go to Sherry first about potential late submission.
Thank you, Chair. So UBCM, their policy is that late resolutions should only come forward if they're new or emerging issues. So if you are aware of the issue before the deadline, technically they may not accept it as a late submission, and typically what they would do is recommend that we bring it forward at the next chapter meeting for us. That would be the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities in spring 2021.
Thank you. Director Pratt and then Director Lee.
I would prefer that we put this forward. It may not be perfect to all of the director's standards, but based on the conversation that the CAO and I had with Modi pre-COVID restrictions, the issues, it's a very timely issue to be bringing forward. They were actually the person we met with at Modi was very happy to have our AVICC resolution because it was something that they were looking at provincially, the whole and anything we can do to encourage multi-ministry collaboration. It needs to be done. The ministries don't speak to one another. They operate in silos. There's all kinds of these layering effects that happen that affect us. So even if we're not, it might not be perfect, it might be not 100%, we can always put in another resolution next year as well, because then we have the year to work on it. But I think putting something forward is better than nothing. And it's timely because they're discussing things like stormwater management and how that affects across the province. So to me, this is a very provincial issue. This is something that we need to look at as a whole across the province. And I think it's really important to put this forward.
Okay, so I'm just going to reflect what I've heard so far. In the recommendation as put forward now, or in the resolution, it says, whereas communities of the Sunshine Coast are dependent. Maybe instead it should read, whereas communities of British Columbia are dependent. That would broaden it. And to your point, Director Pratt, if it comes up at UBCM, we actually have an opportunity at that point to speak to it as well. So any of the work that needs to be done around getting other support, etc., could be done between now and then. Director Lee and then Director McMahon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure where we are in the overall picture of this land use decisions, because I like to put it under a heading of Crown land use and disposition of Crown land as well. It's a topic that's been before the UBCM for many years now. They actually haven't answered us on some aspect of it that we put forward before, and I think we're putting forward again. But this one is specific to logging, I guess. Logging and mining must be what we're talking about here. I don't know if it would include subdivisions where they wipe all the trees out. The government's responsible for that as well. So this topic is an awful big topic. And I guess this might be, if we were to specify that we understood it was a big topic, but we just wanted to talk about this little part for right now, might be a good way of going to it. Not sure though.
And Director Lee, it does talk about land use planning and cumulative effects analysis tools. So I think it isn't just limited to natural resources like logging and mining, etc.
Yeah, a big topic.
It is a big topic. Director McMahon, Director Ties.
Yeah, that was kind of my concern, that it doesn't specify Modi anywhere in here, and it doesn't mention roads and subdivision approvals, which it's, of course it affects all local governments, but it particularly impacts rural areas in regional districts. And that was originally what I was getting at, although there are broader implications, obviously.
And one of the things that showed up in the District of Sechelt is private managed forests, where they're not talking to anybody else either, right? So, and we had no say in any of that. So it's a multi, I mean, I get your point. That's where I'm going. Director Lee, you didn't put your hand down. Director Ties, I've got it now. Director Ties, Director Hills.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support Director Pratt in saying that we should move something forward rather than nothing at all. Yes, it's a multi-jurisdictional, multi-ministry. If we can squeeze Moti in there somewhere specifically, then great. But if not, let's move what we've got.
Thank you, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm in agreement that the timeliness following the procedures are important, and I would say that this is more than better than nothing. This is good. This is really good, and I'd be supportive of broadening. Whereas the communities of British Columbia, a small change, and ultimately this kind of all goes down through the cumulative effects framework. So I would expect Modi to be captured in that, because it applies to resource decisions for all bureaucrats. That's my understanding of it. So I'm not overly concerned with Modi not being in there, but I would be supportive of broadening it from the Sunshine Coast to make it a provincial matter rather than a local matter. So That's supportive of it. Change the geography and get her in.
All right. Seeing no more hands up, Director McMahon. Sorry, you just muted yourself.
Sometimes after we submit it, UBCM sends it back to the submitter for some editing. So, you know, this is not carved in stone, so I can support it.
So would someone like to make a recommendation? Director Pratt.
Sorry, I just took a mouthful of something. But I'd like to move the recommendations on page 87, please.
With the amendment as put forward to change it from Sunshine Coast to British Columbia?
Yes.
All right. Is there a seconder? Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Item number 6. Annex E, pages 89 through 91, and this is an amended report. And we'll turn over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to follow up on the infrastructure planning grants we applied for in January. We've received 2 grants for the Greaves Road and the Merrill Crescent wastewater facilities for the purpose of feasibility studies. We're seeking approval to move forward with these projects and amend the financial plans for these 2 services. And furthermore, that just to inform the board, we've carried forward the grant applications for the 4 remaining wastewater feasibility studies that we applied for in January that were denied.
Thank you. Any questions by the board? Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, totally supportive of it. The question I have is how the granting process of 1 intake and then the second intake, is there any background about what happened, why they're doing it a second time? If you can give any details on that, please.
Yep, thank you, Director.
Go ahead.
My understanding is this is a continuing program with a a set pot of money that's being handed out on a continuing basis. So at this time, this is a repetitive process that we expect to occur again in 2021.
Thank you, Director McMahon.
Just curious if staff had any insight into why some grants were approved and others weren't, because it doesn't seem to have been size or the ones in the worst shape, or any thoughts?
Staff?
We provided the ministry with a priority list, ranking 1 through 6, and these were the 2 highest priority sites that we identified to them.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Yes, first of all, I'm in favor of this. I just have a question on, we have 18 plants that are probably all in need of this eventually. I guess they were considered and they will be talked about when we do the community engagement later in the year, including this aspect of it. And so we'll tell the other ones, we think we're here, we'll know more later. And right now we're working on these. Is that kind of the general idea of the message that'll go out?
On staff?
Thank you, Director. Yeah, that's correct. These 6 systems were identified as the most imminent needing replacement, and therefore looking for a direction as to how to go about that. The remaining 12 have a longer expected useful life, and therefore weren't as imminent for replacement, didn't need feasibility studies. But that being said, where there are grants to offset our costs, we'll seek them out for each of the wastewater systems.
So there's some recommendations on page 89. Would someone like to make those recommendations? Director Hiltz, moved. And seconded, Director Ties. All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Next item is number 7, Annex F, Seashell landfill ground disturbance financial update. And we'll turn this over to Mr. Rosenboom.
Thank you very much, Chair. Last week, at the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting, I updated the board on the status of the remediation efforts for the ground disturbance at the landfill. The purpose of this report is to provide a financial update on the spending of the funds for this year's budget and to seek approval for additional funds for the remainder of the year. At page 93 is a breakdown listed of the cost thus far, and it's clear that additional trucking costs are the majority of the costs were currently occurring to run the operations, and that has to do with the fact that we're currently using low-rise bins that have about half of the capacity than we usually have. So there's a lot more moving around of bins and emptying of bins required. We, as indicated last week, we expect that the full remediation of the site, as well as the development of a new drop-off area, will require up to 6 months. So in total, an additional budget shortfall is identified currently of $237,000 and we are recommending to fund it in part from operational reserves that are currently available for the landfill. That's 84,000, and the remainder 153 from future taxation. This budget would also allow for a consultant to be procured to assist us with the conceptual design and the final designs and the tendering process for the remediation effort and the design of the drop-off areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by directors? Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. It would be on the page 94. It's about the extra bin costs and trucking costs, which is the largest chunk of this proposal. Is that's managed within an existing contract of the contractor, an additional, or how is it? How is the procurement for the additional monthly? And was there? It starts to become a pretty. You could buy a truck for that. So has there been considerations of whether the contracted services versus in-house services? Just if you have any details around the procurement of the $20,000 per month, and is it contract or in-house?
And staff?
Thank you for the question. Currently, it is contracted, and we don't have a truck. A roll-off truck is a specialized truck, and they're even hard to. We would not even able to lease one, even if we would have a driver to operate it. So we are renting. We're currently contracting out a truck and a driver, and those are that's why the costs are such as they are. As one of the options we're considering long-term and identified in last week's report is what would the option be if we continue with low-rise bins long-term. And one of the options we're looking in part of that context is bringing the service in-house and indeed purchasing our own truck, because then you make a long-term investment.
Director Lee?
I got two questions. One's a thought. I don't think we want to get into the trucking business. It's long been known by contractors that trucks are just basically a way of keeping your excavator working. There's no money in trucking. We don't need to go down that line, in my opinion. The other part is that I was wondering if we had considered some way of figuring out how to use the large bins again. we did have a structure built on the other part where you drove up and the bin was down and people threw it in and then you come along and got it. I was trying to figure out what would be the cost of building one on a safe part of our property, and figure out how to move the buildings and things away later on. Has that been looked at? Is my question.
Staff?
That's part of the work that is currently that we're currently started, and this project will where we need a contractor for the construction of drop-off site could cost anywhere between $200,000 and $300,000, $400,000, and that's but we think I do not recommend to invest that money right away unless the soil underneath that area is also remediated, so that you don't have any issues moving forward. So that's why one of the options we're currently, as outlined in last week's report, we're exploring three options. One is continued use of low-rise bins long term, developing a drop-off area at a smaller footprint that we can use for the next 6-7 years until landfill is closed, and development of a full on more high-end drop-off site that we can transfer into a depot or transfer station that we can also use long-term. In both latest options would include the development of a drop-off area with high-rise bins where residents can drop in the material from an elevated platform.
Thank you.
Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Where I'm sort of getting the feeling that we're sort of driving an old car and it's starting to require more and more maintenance, and it's becoming increasingly more expensive to drive. Where are we exactly with investigating a new landfill site? Is there an option of creating like a secondary transfer station where these materials that are going into bins could be handled in large bins?
Where are we at in terms of landfill 2.0? What next? Question. That's currently being procured to get a contractor in, and we hope to get back to the board on that later this year in terms of the options, the feasibility of the options of a new landfill somewhere on the coast, waste to export, or waste to energy, or exporting for burial somewhere else. In all locations, in all options, there might be an option for there might be a policy decision required if a transfer station is desired in the seashell area. And we looked at the options of doing that at this site versus another site in the seashell area. And given that this is SCRD owned land or leased land by the province, but we have it for the next 100 years at least, economically, it would be hard to compete with finding another site somewhere else unless it's already currently public land, in order that we can develop a transfer station somewhere else at a cheaper cost than we can do it at the current site of the landfill.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. So the numbers, 150,000 funded out of taxation for 2021, which is like a 0.75% tax increase, I suppose, in round figures, before we get to that year. So in terms of understanding this, I'm just trying to this seems to be kind of a mandatory kind of public safety aspect of, if I was to look at this next year in the budget, this would be a mandatory item. Would you, or would it, is there any discretion in doing this?
Staff?
That's an interesting question. The question is all related to the willingness to accept the safety risk of the current site and to leave it unremediated. If that liability, if the board would like to accept the liability, we can reopen tomorrow the old site and continue as is. And that's what we're not recommending. And even though the area that we're currently using does not have the highest, the largest voids, we still recommend to remediate it just to make sure that we're reducing our potential liability for the time the landfill is open. And that's why we're looking at, okay, how can we increase the return of investment of that? And that might be making it not only in the drop-off site for the next 6 years, but transferring into a proper transfer station that you can use for decades to come.
So a follow-up, this also has to do with the sustainability of the landfill operation for the remaining years then?
Yeah.
I would characterize. Yeah. Thank you.
Director Lee?
Yes, I guess we shouldn't really be speculating at this time, but the way they do the drop-off stations in the private and the big cities is they actually they build a big building and cement floor, and people just throw their garbage on the floor, and then they load it with excavators and move it from there. They don't even use bins. They compact it and then move it. I don't know if will that be looked at by the person that's going to do this study for us as to see if that is a good way to go. And also, when I think about a cement floor in a building, I think about the fact that when you're building on an unstable ground that you put pilings down to where it's stable and build the platform on that, and you're not actually supporting on the ground underneath, which seems like a solution for what we have with our problem here. And I just would like to know that, are we considering that kind of option as well when we're doing this work?
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. And we look at all the options that are feasible on the site and are appropriate for the scale of a transfer or a drop-off site transfer station. For example, in the city, at the facilities you're talking about, for example, those from Metro Vancouver, the volume they're processing is significantly different. So they might also have different systems. And one of the limitations to dusty roadside is the fact that it's hard to get up there with 90-yard bins, given the road up there and the steepness of it. So that might be one of the factors that we have to consider if we develop the site long term. How can we cost effectively move the materials from there to another site? And maybe that we can do that with 90-yarders, but otherwise we might be restricted with 40-yarders. And the facility type of facilities you're talking about with large concrete floors are usually they usually use the 90-yarders to move the materials from there. So we have to see what the options are, but I can assure you that our contractor will be able and is familiar with those kind of options, concepts as well. So it's our regular landfill contractor, so they know the tonnages and they know the site, and they also support other local governments in developing these kind of facilities. So they know what's coming out there and what's possible.
Thank you. I'd been going to ask the question for multiple meetings, so I thought today's the day. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
All right. On page 92, there are some recommendations. Director Hiltz?
Sure. I'll move the recommendations as presented on page 92.
And it's been seconded. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Thank you. So we are Up to item 8, communications. This is a late item that got added in. It is a letter from Dr. McKee, Office of the Medical Health Officer for Vancouver Coastal Health. This letter, I'll just give a little bit of background on this. On Sunday, I received an email that on Saturday, a pop-up tent had been set up in Sechelt as an overdose prevention site. It was set up by a resident of the community, and then we were informed about it after. And on Monday night, this facility was set up again. So there have been a number of meetings between the RCMP, Vancouver Coastal Health, Lori, me, Bill, and Warren, and a number of other people involved with the community action team on the Sunshine Coast. And what we recognized was that with the community action team, the CAT team we call it, there were a series of community engagements that were set to happen this spring to inform the community about the drug use and drug support and harm reduction initiatives that we are looking to move forward on the Sunshine Coast. In fact, throughout BC. Then COVID hit, and all of the engagements that we wanted to do fell by the wayside, could not happen. Along with that now, they're finding that the drug supply is being poisoned, basically. It's not clean, and it's resulting in higher numbers of overdoses and deaths in the province. On the Sunshine Coast, what we heard in the last few days, that over the last few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, there have been 3 overdose deaths on the Sunshine Coast. And this
earlier this morning, just saying that Town of Gibson's Council last night has asked their CAO to work with the CAOs of Sechelt and the SCRD to work with the community to find a regional solution to this issue. The mayor says that he'd like to support a mobile safe injection site with options for setting up where and when needed. And Director Kroll can speak more to this because it was at his council last night, as well as I also watched part of the conversation that was happening at the district of Sechelt too when this came up forward. It's very much I don't want to call it an emerging issue. I want to call it's a continuing issue, not just for our community, but for our society. And the recent stats showed that in the province of BC, we had more deaths in the month of May from overdose than we did, or from the fentanyl crisis, than we have had for the whole of the COVID pandemic. So there's definitely some issues right now with the drug supply. I don't know if I personally have enough information to move something forward at this time right now, but other than asking staff to work with other staff from the other jurisdictions, but it's certainly something that we need to discuss further. It's a crisis for our community.
Director Kroll and then Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Pratt. Both Dr. McKee and Hawkfeather attended our council meetings last night. And yeah, it's a huge issue. I think Mayor Seegers was at the CAT meeting yesterday afternoon, and on the site where the pop-up tent had been the day before, there was an overdose. So the argument was, had the pop-up been there, it would have alleviated the problem. I think, and just for clarification, and I'll play devil's advocate that people aren't aware, that if there is an authorized pop-up or sort of safe site, it can be approved by Vancouver Coastal Health. And in the case of that, then the RCMP, doesn't have to go in and arrest someone for having illegal drugs. It becomes sort of, as the word implies, a safe area. They tend to be supervised by someone with peer participation to ensure that things are happening properly. Obviously, with the COVID thing, the huge thing is a lot of people have been cut off and people have gone into isolation and they're using drugs, on their own. Just for an example of what a huge problem it is, through Vancouver Coastal Health and a software company, they've developed a software app called Lifeguard. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but you download the app, you put in some personal information like a phone number, you allow it to use your GPS tracking. So if you're going to use a drug, you can activate the app. As you take the drug, you hit start. It gives you a minute, and then it sends you back an alarm. If you don't cancel the alarm, it gives you another 30 seconds. And if you haven't canceled the alarm within that period, it sends out a 911 call. And it'll actually use your GPS to. That's how severe the problem is, that, there's been a need for the creation of this app. What the direction that we, it's a coastwide problem. So, the District of Seashelt or the Regional District or the Town of Gibson's, we're not going to solve it on our own. But I think what is really important that we work together. Mayor Beamish suggested the mobile site. Dr. McKee hasn't had experience. He knows they exist in other areas where it actually is a van that can travel around and provide the facility. Is a mobile vehicle going to be where it needs to be, for the occasion? I inquired at the CAT meeting whether the software can be updated to alert people that are using it where the safe site would be. It's something they're going to work on. We asked, and the other big problem is coming up with an area that the users are comfortable going into, because there have been some issues with the shelter at high tide. Some of the people aren't comfortable, or they've been banned from the site, so they're not welcome at it. We've asked Hawk Feather to advise us of areas in Gibson's that could be appropriate from the user point of view for creating sort of a safe access without inflaming the community. But I think it's something that, which is why the directive came from Mayor Beamish, that, we work together on, coming up with some safe sites that in turn Vancouver Coastal Health can sign off on and, help because the other thing that happens at the safe sites is they test the drug. They use test strips, and I believe Rain City actually have a device that can actually do a more in-depth analysis of the drugs that people have. So, it's time for Team Sunshine Coast to swing back into action.
All right, I just want to comment about the drug testing. The Rain City does have test strips that will test for fentanyl, and people can pick those up and take them home with them. They do not have the spectrometer that some sites have to be able to test for other items. Director Lee, Director McMahon.
Yes, we have to do something, so I'm in favor of working with all the governments. But I'm not aware of what CAT is. Who funds them? Are they volunteer? Where do they operate? Are they in Pender?
The province actually started up a number of community action teams throughout the province as an initial pilot. and then provided additional funding for other community action teams to start up. The community action team has members from up and down the coast and governments. So Vancouver Coastal Health, emergency management, emergency services. Who else is on there? Rain City, Salvation Army, mental health and addictions, basically service providers and those providing any kind of care or support for people who use drugs. And it's looking at a harm reduction model. We've been meeting for 2 years. The program's been in operation here on the Sunshine Coast for 2 years. And as I said, at first it was information, etc., getting naloxone kits out, dealing with some of those things. And it is, as I said, funded by the province. They've also, Vancouver Coastal Health and Seashell Hospital Foundation have also provided some funds to assist as well. With regards to OPS site, there's a whole continuum. It can be something that pops up that is not sanctioned by Vancouver Coastal Health, but Vancouver Coastal Health could provide support to them, training, supplies, etc., to a site that is totally sanctioned and run by a nonprofit organization that is then funded by Vancouver Coastal Health and provides other services as well, like interventions, maybe training, other services for if people need treatment or want to go into treatment, right? So it can go the complete continuum. At this point, we basically have somebody in the community who's put up an OPS. The CAT's role, the community action team's role in this, is to look at how do we actually get to a place where we can have some kind of sustainable, ongoing facility in whatever form that looks like, if it's mobile, if it's fixed, and where it would be. One of the things that is happening this coming weekend is they are looking at training peers. So, people who have used drugs or people with with used experience, they're doing some training with them this weekend, because part of the space needs to be accessible and feel safe for those who use drugs. And a lot of times, if the people manning it are people who've had experience, it makes it a safe place for them to go. So all of that work is happening behind the scenes right now as well. And as I said, some of the work that we wanted to do with the community fell by the wayside because of the pandemic. So I hope that answers your question. Government leaders are all welcome to attend the meetings. If you're welcome to join. If you want an invitation, we can let you know when they are. You're welcome to be there.
Good. Yes, I'd like that. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this with my rural director hat on here, because this is often seen as a sort of urban problem, downtown Gibsons and downtown Seashell, because that's where you tend to have a congregation of visible drug users. But in my area, it's very much, it's sort of like genteel addiction. Everybody is using at home, and there's a great deal more out there than people realize. So an outreach strategy to that population is kind of a different strategy. So I guess I'm asking how the rural directors can get involved, and what kind of next steps are we looking at?
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the overview of the context of the letter. I was trying to puzzle out where the letter came from, but so it's to summarize, it was a response to an undesired pop-up unsanctioned OPS that was not in the community's interest. So my question is, who drives these OPS sites, is it the medical health office, like the action of a local government to some jurisdiction has the authority for these sites. So is this an advocacy piece where the local government is writing to the medical health officer and we have this problem and we want the local government wants some kind of a safe place for people to reduce the harm? So I'm trying to think of what the action that we can do with responses. We're not going to fund it. We're not going to start it ourselves. But what's an action that we can do out of this letter? That's where I'm struggling with.
Okay, I'll answer a couple of the questions. Vancouver Coastal Health, the medical health officer is actually the one who can designate a facility to be a sanctioned facility. So that's the responsibility for that lies with the medical system. District of Sechelt's response to the letter yesterday at our meeting was to refer that letter to staff for potential implications and to come back with potential sites for a temporary OPS in Sechelt. That was the direction that we took. Director Pratt.
Thanks. Just to, there's a couple of pieces that I'd like to just reiterate with the mobile site. There, in Kelowna, they have a fairly successful mobile OPS site that goes between two different locations, and it seems to be working really well. So I think that's something definitely to look into. Another piece is around the lifeguard app, and I know it's mentioned in Dr. McKee's letter, and also Director Kroll referenced it as well. And it's a crucial piece, or it's part of another piece that helps take the stigma away, because this way, if somebody is using, and you can put any drug in there in the app, like, so whether or not it's, you know, it's marijuana or cocaine or what have you, you set the timer, and it's a way of saving lives. You know, it's with the crisis that we have right now, a first-time user can die, and it's or somebody who's extremely experienced at using, and it's a way of reaching out and helping to support our community. This affects all of us. We all have either friends or family members that are in some way have been affected. There's, I think, for the rural areas, to Director McMahon's point earlier, it's the genteel. You know, we might not necessarily see what's going on. I think for our community, the way we're set up, it might be the mobile option might be something to look at as being a solution. I would, and as I said before, I think this is something that we can maybe follow the lead of Sechelt and Gibson's and give it to staff to look at a little bit further, and work with our other outside agencies.
Thank you. Director Kroll, Director McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. You know, the mobile site does seem like a good idea. You know, when you look at the size of the coast, though, you know, one unit, sadly, you know, drug dealers or drug users are not going to wait till Tuesday evening at 7:30 when the mobile unit is there to use. So, you know, the problem I see with the mobile, although, you know, it's something would be better than nothing, is that, you know, it's not always going to be able to be where it's needed. And, you know, with the distances involved in the coast, it's potentially problematic. The one thing that really became blatantly aware at the meeting last night, and Director McMahon sort of alluded to it, is you know, there is a community mindset that, you know, it's not a problem here. You know, 3 deaths on the coast in 1 month to drug overdose is you know, isn't acceptable. You know, we have a memorial that pops up periodically in Gibson's to someone that overdosed from you know, so it is a real issue. And curiously, one of our students, youth counselors from last year, posted on Facebook because the stigma with people who use drugs is you know, is a big part of the problem. You know, it's treated as a criminal activity when really it should be addressed as a health issue. Why people ended up on drugs, you know, it can happen. And I think, you know, we need to engage, and here we go back to communications again, sort of a community awareness that this is a health problem, and that it needs to be dealt with, and create an environment where people can feel comfortable seeking help. And it's a really complex issue. Agreed, yes, we all need to work on it together, but I think it needs to be, you know, it needs to be something that's moved to the head of the line, because it's, you know, May was an all-time record for drug-related deaths in this province. And it's not getting better. So, you know, I agree that, you know, we all need to work together on it, but I would also advocate that it that the action taken be sooner than later.
Director Mann?
Yeah, I would like to be pointed to any outreach materials that are available that I could share with my community association and on my website and in my newsletter to try and get the word out there. You know, it needs to be spread widely, and perhaps a good place to put some outreach material would be places like grocery stores that everybody goes into, where there is no stigma about approaching somebody. The other question I had is, should we refer this matter to the policing committee for discussion? Discussion is great. If there's any concrete actions that we can think about, that would be a little more helpful.
All right. Anybody else? Any concrete actions? Director Kroll.
Just to Director McMahon, Poppy Hallam is on the CAT committee. And, you know, in the event of a Vancouver Coastal Health, because this is a medical emergency, it's ranked right up there with COVID. So they have the same powers dealing with this that they have with the COVID. And under the Emergency Act, if Vancouver Coastal Health declares a site as safe, then it takes the onus off the RCMP of having to go in and deal with people who are, you know, have drugs in their possession and are on a premise with these drugs. So it eliminates that whole necessity for the extra work on the part of the police department. That's not to say that they may not become involved if there's someone who has other issues rather than drug related, mental health issues, and that come into play. But at least if there is a safe site, usually, as was indicated by Dr. McKee last night, they try and ensure that they have other resources at the site that they can help deal with other problems other than the drug issue.
Director Hiltz.
In terms of an action, Seashell's put some staff resources, the town of Gibson's put some staff resources. Would it be appropriate for us to request that those be forwarded to the regional district, and then SCRD staff package that up for a committee report? Would that, I don't know what staff's capacity is to manage this, but there's already work done to bring it into one place and package it up for the board.
Could we just direct staff to work with their counterparts in the other governments. Sechelt Nation is also working on this as well. And all the governments have a representation at the community action team, which is going to be moving actions forward. So if we're going to bring government resources to that, it would typically be through our CAOs. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I get a lot of health-related emails from Blue Cross, our provider. Perhaps we could ask them to circulate public health information on overdose prevention to everybody that they serve.
Okay, is there a recommendation that someone would like to put forward with regards to the letter? Director Hills.
I'll try. We refer it to staff to work with other local governments and to report back as appropriate.
All right. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? All right. Any further questions or comments? Before we vote on this, I just want to say when this came up at our council meeting last night, some of our councillors indicated that while they knew there are, they know there are drugs on the coast and people are using drugs, the whole conversation was so foreign to them that they had more questions than, to be able to even move something forward was totally outside of their reality. So I understand there's a whole education piece at our level and at the community level that needs to move forward. And that is the conversation that we're looking to engage in. So to Director McMahon's request for outreach materials, definitely those materials will be coming forward. So Director McMahon?
Yeah, I also want to mention that we have to get the message out that yes, it's a problem here on the coast. We had this same conversation over COVID because VCH did not want to release any details about cases on the coast. So people thought, oh, it's not a problem here. And we get into this difficulty over because of privacy issues. And I understand that. But it's very helpful for the community to know that this is a real problem and it's not just people that you may see on the street corner. This is your neighbors. Mm-hmm. So whatever we can do to get that message out would be very helpful.
Sophie Woodruff is in our meeting here from the Coast Reporter. And I want to mention that yesterday at the CAT meeting that we had, Sophie was actually there because Sophie has been working with the executive director of the CAT team to work to get information out. So she's been putting together articles and things, putting them in the paper. So we'll continue to do that. And I just want to thank Sophie for her support in that. All right, we have a recommendation on the floor. Yes, Director Kroll.
I was just going to say social media as well, because right now the advocacy for support for people who have drug problems is not being reflected on social media. The dialogue on social media, it's gut wrenching. It's and it's sort of directed at the users. They're this huge problem. They're criminals. So I think one of the big areas that really needs to be concentrated on is this change in the mindset as reflected in social media. And I think I know a lot of people in government roles tend to avoid social media because you start going down rabbit holes and getting lost in the weeds. But I think even with friends that are on social media, if you can get them to change their views, it's going to have a huge impact. Because the dialogue the other day with the most recent death in Sechelt, it was heartbreaking. And, we're supposedly to be looking after our most vulnerable, but they were being totally trashed. And that's unacceptable.
All right. We have a recommendation on the floor. All those in favor of the recommendation? Thank you. So that's the communications. New business. During the agenda review, Director Ties, you indicated that you wanted to bring forward a topic for new business.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Let me just quickly look up the wording that I put together.
It was about First Nations relations support.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so the intention is to bring this up is to see whether we can get some support, some actual concrete support to the First Nations to communicate, to be able to communicate more effectively with us and other local governments. And my thoughts were to actually go and speak to the Aboriginal Relations Committee for Metro Vancouver, of which we are a non-voting member, and ask, first of all, what they have done to support their ways of communicating, and then also to see whether there's some appetite to help support the nations in increasing their capacity in making, creating positions on their end for local government relations. And so I thought I'd bring this up and see what the appetite around the board is for this kind of initiative.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, when we met with the Squamish Nation last fall, I think it seems a long time ago now. One of the problems that they identified is the number of referrals that they get, and they simply do not have the capacity to deal with the avalanche of referrals that they get from, I thought it was 18, but I now understand there's 22 different governments in the Squamish territory. And of course, they don't have the staff to do this. So they specifically asked local governments to go back and look at how we could resource them to be able to respond to these referrals. So I think this is absolutely a conversation we should have, and that's a good starting place. So I support Director Ties.
Director Kroll, and then I'm going to be on the list. Thank
you. Further to Director McMahon, the capacity was the big issue, and I'm assuming it's a similar issue with the Squamish Nation. And the suggestion that was, or the Sechelt Nation, the suggestion that was made by the Squamish Nation was that we hire a band member as our liaison. So they have someone inside their unit who we would liaise directly with, who in turn would bring it to their respective boards. In the conversation, as I recall from the session last fall, it was sort of something that the town of Gibsons or the district of Sechelt or the regional district, it was going to be an expensive cost individually, but I'm just wondering if perhaps there is a way, if this liaison would work, that we could find someone who is acceptable to both nations, and between the three communities, find some means of compensating them for their efforts.
Okay, this is actually prior to this conversation here. It actually came up at District of Sechelt, recognizing that our process for referrals is basically send out the whole package to to Sechelt Nation, everybody basically, and you get this huge big package of material, but we don't really identify the piece that we want them to focus on for us. So they get this whole big thing and they have to read and give us some kind of feedback. So what we're looking at, I mean, it's different than, say, a fire department. Fire department knows they have to look at the fire safety issues, and that's it. The Sechelt Nation, unless we actually identify, we'd like your input on this piece. These are all sorted already. We'd like your input on this piece. We're actually looking at our role as a referring agency to them to assist with reducing the draw on their resources. So that might just be another avenue that we could look at here at the regional district. So I've got Director Ties and Director Ram.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what Director Seegers just said. I think we should be able to streamline the workload for the First Nations if we can. And further to Director Kroll's comments, I think I think it's a noble idea to focus on the coast, but I think this bears some larger discussions with the rest of Metro Vancouver, where the Squamish Nation has 22 others, and I think between those 22 other governments, we should be able to get 3, 4, 5 people hired, that can then deal with these issues in an appropriate way, and then that way we can be cost sharing. That's sort of my intention of going to the Aboriginal Relations Committee and seeing what can be done.
Director McMahon?
Sorry, we also don't prioritize referrals, and that might be something else that we could look at, because we send a lot of referrals, but obviously some are we care about more than others. Oh dear, am I not allowed to say that? I'm not sure. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is that if our relationship with First Nations is really a priority, then we have to resource it. We actually have to put our money where our mouths are, whatever. So I support, again, Director Tises. I think this is a good place to start, is with the other governments of Metro Vancouver to look at this.
Director Lee?
I definitely support Director Ties going and starting the discussion with the with governments that have are already doing it. Maybe we can learn from them and figure out where the funding should come from. I'm a believer that they should be funded, but I believe it should be the federal and the provincial governments that are funding it. The Crown, as what we know as the Crown here in Canada, they got dual responsibilities. We have to figure out how the First Nations fund their government functions long term. Most of our referrals, though, are in support of a project that's being spearheaded by the provincial government. And I look at that as a downloading of costs to ask us to fund that. We're already in a support situation, and we are bearing those costs of being in a support situation, and we do it by service, which we're allowed to have a bylaw for those services. I don't think we're allowed to have a bylaw for this kind of a service, though. Anyways, I guess someone like Sherry could tell me about that aspect of where the money would come from if we decided to do something like this.
I think Remco would like to speak to that.
I cannot speak on the part where the money would come from, but I can provide maybe a little bit of insight in what type of referrals we're sending to the nations. Actually, it is every water project we do, we send a referral. The big, small, every shovel we put in the ground, we have an agreement on we have an understanding of what kind of referral is required, what kind of involvement. So there are a lot of referrals going to both nations, and from my time when I was within the province, I know that nations are, in general, province-wide, are stretched in their ability to respond to all the questions they're receiving. And further to the point of that Director McMahon raised in terms of helping them to understand what the referrals are is a big part of their challenge, because they only receive a package and they don't receive the support, maybe the information such that they can easily prioritize themselves what the priorities are. And so having the conversations with the nations on how do you want to receive the referrals, what would be how can we streamline the process? That's where I used to be a lot of involved in when I was with the province, and I know that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from, for example, the Vancouver table or others, because I know that there's a lot of innovative steps already taken and explored, and some went down in the trash bin again because they didn't work and others work. So my suggestion would be connect with others, and then connect with the nations that have an interest in within the SJD jurisdiction, and connect with them how they would like to, how we can collaborate on a process to advance this. Thank you.
Director Hiltz.
It's an amazing topic. So I'm gonna, this is, the referrals that the local government sends falls under, I believe, under the 3 prior and informed consent aspect of Indigenous rights. And the funding of that, big question. I'm supportive of any of us, and particularly Director Ties, with his connection to the committee with Metro Vancouver. But underlying this, it came out of the Squamish webinar, is the readiness of an organization and a community to participate. So I kind of put how we structure our referrals, how that's written. That's an organizational readiness. And so I feel that there's an awful lot of work for the organization and the community to figure out how to participate. I think the First Nations have more than enough people who want to participate, but what they're looking for is communities that are ready to participate somehow. And I would be reluctant at this point to suggest that we hire someone for them to do something on their behalf for us to meet our requirements of free and prior and informed consent. I feel like I'm a little out of my lane speaking for First Nations on what they want us to do. I keep this idea of organizational and community readiness, I think is where, at this point, I think this is where we mostly are, both with SIGD and the Squamish Nation. I'm kind of not even familiar with how we send out referrals, but typically when we get the reports back is time limit had lapsed, and no comments received. So this is the thing that keeps coming back, is the ability for the organization's readiness to participate, both in terms of staff, quality of reports, understanding of issues, and just understanding free and prior and informed consent. That's a real eye opener for me. Yeah, I'm supportive of that kind of community readiness, organizational readiness.
Director Ties, do you have a recommendation you could put forward? I think you're just looking for board support for you to represent us.
Yeah, maybe that. I don't know. Do I need to ask for a motion for the board support, or
Sherry? Let's go to Sherry.
I've drafted something to assist that might help.
That'd be great.
Okay. That the board liaison to the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Relations Committee bring forward the topic of compensation for First Nations intergovernmental relations and consultation referrals.
That works for you?
Sounds good.
Okay. So who would like to make that recommendation? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. No other new business items to be brought forward. So we have a motion here to go in camera and that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 91K of the community charter. Someone like to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll look to IT first, and then we'll go for questions.
We're ready for you to start the question period.
The closed session, okay. Is there anybody in the gallery?
Just
Sophie?
Sophie.
Okay. Does Sophie have any questions?
Can we move her in with us?
We can. Would you like me to do that?
Sure.
If she'd like to ask a question, sure. Just like old times.
Hi, Sophie.
Hello.
Hi. Any questions for us?
I guess, since now I'm in, I don't have a choice, do I?
No, you could actually say you don't have any questions. We'd be okay with that.
Well, I guess the only thing that I was curious about, and I guess this would be directed to whoever's sitting on at the CAT meeting and who might have further insight into it, is the question of safe supply on the Sunshine Coast. I understand that's also a piece of this. And it was mentioned as kind of there had been some challenges in terms of people's access to safe supply. Is that something anybody is able to speak to in terms of, what that challenge was specifically or continues to be specifically? If not, I don't have anything else.
I would say that would be a conversation to talk to Megan about. There is a group, and some of the people who are involved in ensuring that doctors and patients connect and get the supplies that they need. They've been working on that piece, and that came out of the mandate by the province, right, to make sure that safe supply was available. Part of it, I think you're going to find, Sophie, is that it has to do with training of the doctors, actually, because in order for the doctors to be able to provide the safe supply, they need to understand the uses, the different types of drugs and the uses, et cetera, before they feel confident that they can actually provide them. But Megan can give you more information and direct you to who to talk to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Do we need another break before we... Yes? No? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Let's do 5 minutes and then we'll be back. So it is 12:07. We're coming back at 12:12. Okay.
How about 25 minutes and we'll have lunch?
Welcome back. We've moved out of our in-camera session of the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting. So I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you very much. And we will see you at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.